Dr. Renee Hilliard here, and today I'm here to talk about guilty pleasure. So, what does that term even mean? Most of us were taught that pleasure is something that you shouldn't have too much of, and I'm not just talking about sexual pleasure, although that is a big arena where most of us feel some kind of guilt around having too much pleasure. But even just simple things like food, which we eat every day, but there's a concept that you shouldn't enjoy your food too much, or you shouldn't eat too much of foods that you enjoy. And most cultures on the planet have a negative spin on pleasure. It's something that you're encouraged to be ashamed of or feel guilty about. But is that true? If most of us agree that life is about joy, we talk about the joy and the journey, and joy is about pleasure. So if we're to enjoy the journey, that includes pleasure, but there's this idea that we should put a cap on our pleasure. I remember being a kid and, myself and other kids would be laughing or giggling, and an adult would say, "Don't have too much fun," or "You girls are having too much fun." I remember hearing that a lot as a kid. Or even just feeling guilty in these times. We're in the times of COVID-19, and the fact that there are people suffering, many of us feel guilty if we have joy in our lives right now, which there is always suffering on the planet. There always is. There's 7.8 billion people on the planet. Every single day somebody is having a bad day. And the idea that because some other person is suffering, that means that I must suffer too, is a recipe for a life of suffering. So, maybe even retelling the story that, especially because there's so many people suffering, it's even more important that I call pleasure into my life. And in order to maintain my positive vibration and be able to help others, it's necessary that I bring pleasure into my own experience daily. And, as long as we're not hurting anybody, isn't pleasure something that we should seek? There's a certain feeling of guilt or secrecy about pleasure. I asked my husband before I started recording, I said, "What's your guilty pleasure?" And he was like, "Oh, your ribs when you barbecue." And I said, "Why are you guilty about it?" And he was like, "Beats me." It's just something that we're taught to feel about our pleasures. For me, for years I would say, "Oh, dessert's my guilty pleasure," or, I want dessert. Does anybody else want dessert? Does anybody want to split it? And now I'm like, I want dessert and I don't want to split it with anybody. Bring me a full dessert, please. And, I've struggled with my weight, like I said, my whole adult life. And, I'm not at my leanest, and I'm, 30 pounds down from my heaviest. There was a time where, because I'm not at my leanest, weight, that I wouldn't allow myself the pleasure of dessert. And I luckily have evolved to the point where I'm like, if I want it, I'll eat it. But it doesn't feel so necessary anymore because it's not something I'm depriving myself of. During this COVID time, I've, found some comfort in baking. I'm a baker, so I've been eating way more sweets than I normally do. And I've tried to dial it back a little bit just because I don't feel my best when I eat that much sugar. And I feel healthier and more clear-minded and less sluggish when I'm eating a little bit cleaner, but not because I don't deserve dessert, and there was a long stretch of time where I felt that way, that I'm not worthy of dessert or it's shameful to eat dessert. And I'm like, it's not, but, do I want to eat 3 desserts a day? Probably not in my best interest, so I'll skip, some of that. Another big one for people is rest, the guilty pleasure of rest. And especially with so-called successful people, we tend to push ourselves to the point of burnout. and not allow ourselves periods of rest, or even when we are resting, we say things like, oh, I'm being lazy today, I haven't done anything. And it's important to rest and recharge in order to be able to bring your best self when you're in production mode. If you think of nature and the seasons, trees don't fruit all year round. Fruiting trees don't fruit all year round. They go through periods of production, and they go through periods of rest in winter so that they can recharge and re-nourish themselves so they're ready to produce the next time around. So we can take a lesson from that and learn to give ourselves periods of rest, periods of slower production, and then periods of bountiful production, as though we are in the seasons, and listening to our bodies, and when our bodies call for rest, to actually give it to our body without feeling guilty about it. And that's the way you have sustainable production. But continuing to push through when you're depleted is a recipe for disaster. And I've been there before. And also, I know the pain of trying to numb out with all kinds of substances, food to alcohol to binge watching TV to whatever you can do to try to ease the pain because you've pushed yourself past the comfort point. But we even go into, we go as far as punishing ourselves for experiencing pleasure or wanting to experience pleasure. It can go, from guilt to rebellion, where you've made yourself feel guilty for so long about something that now you go and swing the opposite direction, where now you're rebelling against the rules and overindulging in something just because you've been deprived of it for so long, or shaming yourself about it for so long. So it can lead to risky behaviors. It can lead to poor self-care, just because you at some point just start ignoring the voice and say, I'm just going to do what I want to do, and then go overboard because you felt guilty about giving yourself pleasure for so long. Now you overindulge in things to the point where now it is risky for you. So how do we break this cycle or change this feeling about feeling guilty about pleasure? Well, one is just being aware that you're doing it. So if you start saying, oh, I want to eat this, oh, I'm being so bad, and I'm being a bad girl because I want some chips. Notice that and try to change the way you speak to yourself. So you could either say, you know what, this is not in my best interest and I don't want to indulge in these right now, or I'm going to go ahead and have some chips and I need not feel guilty about it. I'm just going to enjoy them. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you become with treating yourself, and giving yourself compassion for, indulging in things. Also, many of us were socialized to believe that it's wrong to receive. So we give and give and give, but we have a hard time receiving. And pleasure is about receiving. So changing your mentality to, I deserve to receive help. I deserve to receive pleasure. And this comes into play a lot during sex, especially for women, that we're taught we're supposed to be pleasing to our partners. We're supposed to be good in bed. We're supposed to look a certain way, smell a certain way, act a certain way, sound a certain way. But a lot of times we forget that the whole point should be pleasure, and even beating ourselves up because we don't get to some goal that society has defined for us of orgasm, if that's a challenge for us. And not even giving ourselves enough time to get there because we want to be pleasing to our partner and we don't want to be a problem. We don't want to take up too much time. And just learning to indulge and learn to receive and go as slow as you need to go and speak up and communicate your needs. And also calling as many things into the experience as you can that will increase the odds that you'll have a pleasurable experience. So bringing all 5 senses online, putting together a playlist or having your partner do that, nice fabrics, silky fabrics and that kind of stuff in the bedroom, nice feeling sheets, burning candles with nice scents, for instance, can help to increase the pleasurable experience. And also just dropping into those five senses. If you're having a challenge and feeling aroused, going into the senses, let me open my eyes and take a look around me and rig the game so that there are pleasurable things to look at around the room. Create as nice of a space as you can, make it as nice looking as you can, so when you open your eyes and look around, you can look at delightful things around you and listen to the beautiful music, and move your body in a way that feels sensual and feels pleasurable to you, and connecting to the breath. So the breath is a really good way to bring yourself back into the present moment, being present with your breath and being really focused on the breath and dropping into the breath. Taking nice deep slow breaths can bring you into the experience and bring your pleasure online. Pleasure exists in the present moment, and so if your brain is checking out and you're thinking about, what if I don't perform well enough, or what if I don't orgasm fast enough, or am I taking too much time, or is he enjoying this or she enjoying this, or if you're going into the past and thinking about resentments about how your partner didn't help with chores, or what work you left on your desk today. Those kinds of things can interrupt pleasure, but staying present by bringing the five senses online is really helpful. I've found to bring you into the present moment where pleasure is found. But even just throughout the day, even during the workday, you can take a 20-second pleasure break. You can stroke your skin, you can move your body in a way that feels good, and nobody needs to know what you're doing. You can be in a business meeting and just kind of roll your neck and stretch. Take a nice sigh breath. Take a nice breath. You can even just rock in place for a couple of seconds. And most people wouldn't even notice that you're doing that. I've always enjoyed swivel chairs, so during really boring medical meetings are notoriously boring as hell. So one thing I used to do is, if they had swivel chairs, I would just kind of gently rock myself side to side like this. People thought I was probably fidgety or something. I don't know what they thought, but just that little bit of movement and then stretching my neck and rolling my shoulders a little bit from time to time made me feel not so trapped and stuck in the meeting. Or even just making up little jokes. When people would say stuff, I would amuse myself with jokes and not like start laughing out loud like, people might be concerned that I'm lost it. But when somebody would be way too serious about something, I would like amuse myself by telling a joke in my head, and that was enough to like bring pleasure into the experience. But I always set myself up for success by bringing in my favorite beverage. I love tea, so I would always have a cup of tea or coffee and, just slowly sip it while people were speaking and kind of tune out for, the boring bits. But one thing these times have shown me and so many people is that we normally run around frantically doing things that don't really bring us much pleasure, and never stop and take time to enjoy ourselves. We have all these obligations that we got to fulfill and all these duties and activities that we do, but slowing down and really giving ourselves some space and time to enjoy our loved ones, enjoy the quiet and silence, is what a joyful life is about. So I encourage you to just take a few minutes each day to just drop in to your body, ask what your body needs to experience more pleasure in every day. And it may mean turning off technology, turning off the news, but it could just mean being present and aware while you're drinking a sparkling water, or really smelling a rose, or having the sunshine on your face and just feeling the pleasure of that, or giving yourself a delicious foot massage, or anything else. But just be mindful of calling pleasure into your day. And there really is no such thing as a guilty pleasure. That's all a mindset thing. That's a story that we've been told, but it's not true. That pleasure is the way to enjoy life, and cultivating that is a practice, and it's a joyful practice. And so I encourage you to do more of that. Leave your comments below if there's any content that you'd like more of, or any topics that you'd like me to cover. And I look forward to seeing you soon. I love you.